Mike and Ian, it's great to have you here. I'm super excited. Today, I'm here with Ian, CEO of LRQA, and Mike, co-founder of Krew. Ian, would love to hear an intro on your side.
Great. Thanks, Brooke, and thanks for having me. So, for those of you who don't know, LRQA, we are a 250-year-old company doing certification auditing for help companies obviously meet certain standards. We audit or certify 55,000 companies against more than 500 different standards.
Amazing. And we're marrying kind of the established assurance agency with the latest voice AI company. So, Mike, would love to hear your intro on your side.
Hey guys, thanks for having me, Brooke. So I'm Mike. I'm co-founder here at Krew. We build, AI agents for loan servicing teams at some of the largest financial institutions across the country, across voice, across text, over email, right, to help reduce handle time, improve resolution rates, and free human agents to focus on complex cases.
Yeah. And I'm Brooke. I'm the founder of Coval, and we build simulation platform to help you scale your voice agents to millions of phone calls across regulated industries across the board. And my background's from Waymo, so I led our evaluation infrastructure team at Waymo, and my team was responsible for all of our developer tools. So now we're bringing all of that from robotics and self-driving to building autonomous voice agents. And today we're going to be recapping, actually, we just completed an audit of Krew's voice agent, where we looked into the first audit of a voice agent that we know of how well a voice agent is doing in regulated spaces, especially in financial services, starting with Krew and looking at how well they were able to navigate really tricky and complex cases fully autonomously in a way that was 100% compliant with a very low error rate across, so that they're now able to operate across millions of calls. Um, yeah, Mike, actually, like, how did you guys came to us with this idea? What was the inspiration for it? Like, how did you kind of decide that an assurance setup was important to you guys?
Yeah, so we had customer interest, right? And we were working with some pretty large financial institutions in the country. And, these are legacy institutions with a really strong risk, sort of management sort of posture, right? So they really care a lot about ensuring that their members, their customers, their constituents have a great experience, right, interacting with them, especially given that it concerns people's money, their homes, their student loans, and everything else in between. So when we engage with our customers, they flagged up the fact that how would we know that your AI is actually compliant? How would we know that your AI is not going to go off the rails, right? And start offering people discounts in their loans, right? Or start promising things that they shouldn't be promising. And that's when we said, hey, we do have evaluation infrastructure. Hey, there are assurance agencies. Why don't we do a first of its kind sort of industry leading assurance audit to see if we could allay some of these concerns, right? To see if we can prove our posture, compliance posture, safety posture, security posture, right? So that's kind of why we started doing this, and it's been a great, I would say, collaboration thus far, right? And I want to hand it over to Ian. What do you think?
Well, first off, can I just say it's so exciting to be part of a conversation and a movement that's underway. You two are founders of companies doing really interesting, innovative things, all in the AI space. Obviously, Brooke, as you try and make AI agents, meet certain standards and obviously perform at the right level. And obviously, Mike being on the front line to introduce AI agents to customers to help on things like collections and financial management, et cetera. It's fantastic. Obviously, my profession, the profession of assurance, right, to verify that companies are meeting regulations or sort of international standards to help facilitate trade is learning, as all of you are learning, what are the standards that we want to hold companies accountable to, and how much of it is coming from individual companies that want to demonstrate to their customers they meet standards, or coming from regulation. And so, from our vantage point, obviously, we want to be on the ground floor as these standards emerge and help to build the infrastructure to give confidence to customers, confidence confidence to companies that what they are experimenting with, what they are implementing, meets the best standards available in the market. And that's what's fun about this collaboration. We're building this together.
Yeah, I think that's what's so exciting about the intersection of these three companies is that voice agents are the first agents in AI to be truly autonomous, where they're handling tasks end to end on behalf of what otherwise would have been someone like understanding that process and executing that process end to end. And it's also the first case that we've started with in AI uh, that's truly autonomous because there's this groundwork of the infrastructure required to do this autonomously. So you have IVR, you have a fairly simple, like one person on one side and one person on the other side. There's a set of standard operating procedures. And that has been what has allowed us to start in autonomy in those cases. I think now we're starting to see this in the industry expand beyond just standard operating procedures or customer success and moving into, concierge or advice or all of these more product facing use cases that didn't exist before. And I think the same thing is happening with assurance, where people are going to care the most about the assurance of agents in regulated spaces. And Mike, the space with Krew is particularly interesting because there's already a very clear set of things that we expect agents to do via voice. And now that's an AI executing on those things. And so that's what I found really interesting about this partnership is that there was this framework to start with of specific regulations to look at and ensure compliance around. And that first foray into how can enterprises start to think about what they want their agents to do and what they definitely don't want them to, even before there's regulation. Ian, I'm curious how you've seen the patterns emerging with voice AI today mirror some of the existing patterns around technology emerging previously, given that this is a new space for many.
Well, it certainly is. Obviously, I mean, what both of you have done and what we, the three of us organizations, are doing together is really cutting edge, right? It's using technology and generally accepted assurance practices to verify there are policies, there are procedures, there are systems in place, and they have a consistent output on behalf of Mike's customers, right? And so I think that is groundbreaking. If I look for parallels in other parts of our work, we see it in things like greenhouse gas or in cybersecurity. There are a variety of voluntary standards that emerged that many companies have adopted, whether because to demonstrate that they're meeting best practices or because they wanted to be a front runner company to manage these risks effectively. But eventually, those voluntary practices become written into law. And we see Europe and the UK really entertaining serious discussions about how we can have regulated AI agents built within the frameworks in the European Union or in the UK. I still see this as also happening in the United States eventually, maybe at a state level or eventually at a national level. And so I think what both of you represent, and Mike, what you've done to start with your company is really at the beginning, but I think you have a head start when the regulation gets caught up to what we're doing at a voluntary nature. That should ultimately give you a head start against many others in the space.
Yeah, I also think that it's very similar to SOC2. We use SOC2 as an analogy of where we're headed as well, is that SOC2, well, there's definitely shortcomings. It actually allows so many different enterprises to talk about security and understand security without necessarily understanding all of the nitty gritty and low level details of, say, like AWS permissioning and best practices around databases. And I think that's missing today in voice AI because voice AI can be so complex and hard, non-deterministic systems. You have an autonomous system taking actions on your behalf. And the reason I'm really excited about the work that we're doing here and this assurance model is that now it gives other people the language of, without having to understand every single fine-grained detail, I can know that this system has gone through robust testing and I can trust it to take actions and rely on systems that are customer facing, and starting to provide like language and understanding around that. And so SOC 2, for example, has never been part of regulation, but is still a really common framework that allows enterprises to move quickly and to move quickly with trust. Mike, I'm curious, like, what are you
Absolutely.
hearing from your customers, and kind of how did this come up to begin with, and kind of what are you hearing from customers of what they're looking for in kind of this, um
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. It's funny actually. Just the other day, I was just yesterday or 2 days ago, I was actually on call with a customer, and they were evaluating voice AI agents. So we jumped on a call with them, and they said, "We heard about you guys. We need to have a chat." And I said, "Sure. Don't you guys already have voice AI? Right?" It was a pretty large bank, and they said, "Yes, we do." But then we realized very quickly that it was also providing information to our customers about competitors, about it was providing information to our customers about the weather. And they realized that, hey, there is no, like, will your system do this, right? Like, this is another example of a really large regulated financial institution recognizing that voice AI inherently requires supervision, right? Requires assurance, requires third party independent audits, requires uh, scrutiny, right? And it's not just financial institutions as well, it's also regulators, right? The former chair of the National Credit Union Administration, Carl Hoffman, actually, he used to host an annual sort of AI conference roundtable, right? Where he would sit together with all the AI companies, right, that he's interested in. And he would try to figure out, or the regulators from the NCUA, closed door, behind the scenes, would try to figure out what in the world is going on, right? And how do you regulate? How do you ensure that you know companies are doing this safely, are doing it compliantly, right? And it's something that's been happening for years. First, regulators looked at the origination side of things, but now, of course, they're starting to turn their eye into servicing, right? And later stages of the consumer credit life cycle. And the honest answer is regulators are trying to understand, right? Regulators are trying to see what best practices look like in the industry, right? And this is a great opportunity to potentially help set, develop understanding, right, amongst regulators in the US, right? Uh, I think there could be a world whereby voice AI agents in highly regulated spaces who are not independently audited are not allowed to be released, right? Are not allowed to be used in the public. And I think that's a world which, frankly, I think would make consumers, would be better for banking, better for financial services, better for consumers, right? And it's possible that I think countries begin exploring that, right, as they begin to, sort of standardize and update their regulatory frameworks.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because there is there's a situation where I think a lot of your customers are in, where they're doomed if they don't use AI and doomed if they feel doomed if they do. And so there's this it's threading the needle of how do we deploy AI in a really safe and reliable way is paramount, because there isn't an option of just taking the back seat and waiting to see what happens. And there isn't really the option to just try a bunch of things out and, um, you know, throw things at the wall. And so what you guys have done is really exciting because you're able to show we have demonstrated results at over thousands, tens of thousands of calls. It's going to perform exactly as we expect every single time. And so you can give your customers that confidence in the system without having to necessarily make this false choice between two options. Ian, where are you seeing this among your customers today? Like, how are people thinking about AI? Obviously, it kind of varies across the board of much, size of enterprise, et cetera. What are you seeing in terms of the market and how they're thinking about assurance for voice AI?
I think most of the progress on responsible AI have come through sort of emerging standards through the ISO movement. That's the ISO 42001 standard that is now becoming more ubiquitous, and more companies are asking about that. I think what's interesting is that we, as a company, one of the largest auditing companies out there, we've had to really staff up and use some of our expertise from our cybersecurity team because I think traditional assurance with folks that focus on management system is just not enough to meet with the emerging kind of trends of AI. And so, as we see with AI agents, it's really challenging us as a firm. How do we make sure that we have the best and brightest people who have capability not just in auditing and management system, but also in cybersecurity to be able to test and verify certain elements of how AI agents are being deployed within an organization. And so I see this becoming more joined up with cybersecurity, to your point about SOC2 earlier, and as we test certain things. I also see more and more companies starting with things like ISO 42001 certification and then evolving as the standards evolve into more in-depth versions of 42001 or voluntary standards that really are testing things in new and different ways. But it's very exciting. I will say that I think we're all learning as we go. But I think the if we do this right collectively, then we're going to give greater confidence to the companies that are deploying AI throughout their operations, that they think they can do so responsibly in accordance with emerging regulation, but also to give customers confidence that the AI agents are actually meeting their expectations and not having any hallucinations or giving false weather reports that shouldn't
Yeah,
exist.
totally. I think I've been really impressed with how you, Ian, and also LRQA in general has been thinking about assurance for AI. At least from my perspective, it seems like it's moving. You guys are moving particularly fast and ahead of the trends and seeing, even before everyone has adopted voice agents at scale, where this is going and kind of where the assurance models are going. And I think you've correctly realized that it's much harder to test these systems where you have to, it's not necessarily you're just, having someone with a different set of domain expertise going and testing a bunch of calls, but actually being able to simulate this at scale for tens of thousands of calls or millions of calls and looking at what is the rate of errors in those millions of calls is a completely different ballgame for assurance. Um, this has been a really exciting proof point of that, is that we are able to prove out like what does that look like to test a new non-deterministic model where it's not necessarily a checklist of you know things to look at, but rather it's a non-deterministic system that you have to statistically prove. How do
Yeah.
you think you were able to have those headlights and see, I think, given a 250-year organization, it's ahead of its time by any standard, and especially given um, the existence of the organization. How were you able to see ahead of the curve there?
Yeah. Well, look, first off, I would just say that while we've been doing this type of assurance or limited assurance in a variety of emerging standards for many, many years, I will say that audit firms like ours are not prepared for voice AI agents without technology providers like what Coval has built and is building. So this is a blend of where technology and obviously human oversight through proper governance and auditing comes together. And I think that's super critical for this to be successful, not just for you, Mike, but for your customers to have confidence in what ultimately Krew is building and deploying on behalf of your customers. So, but I think for us as a company, look, this path of kind of AI being adopted by the private sector, it's coming very fast. We need to do our job together to give confidence to customers as well as to regulators that the private sector can use AI responsibly and to limit any potential negative impact it can have on data, on privacy, on obviously on harm to communities or stakeholders as well. And without assurance, without oversight, I think real risk can emerge for companies. And our job is to prevent that, to identify risk, but also to prevent it.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I think, a really interesting thing to note as well is that the administration is currently thinking of or considering, right, sort of a limitation on outsourcing to BPOs overseas, right? And that sort of push is going to accelerate, I think, the adoption of voice AI in general across both regulated and, financial services and, other industries, right? And as people start to adopt more voice AI in the industry, they're going to start to want, you know, proof points. They're going to start to want to ensure that they're safe, they're secure, they're audited, right? That they're not going to hallucinate, and that push means that there is an urgent need for companies like LRQA and Coval, right? To kind of support the development of the ecosystem and to support the development of the requisite infrastructure, right? As regulators or administrators start looking into this space, because I think it's only a matter of time.
Definitely. In terms of the actual test that we ran, Mike, how are you thinking about like, I think you guys, have been testing this at scale for thousands of tests, for tens of thousands of tests to understand how well your voice agent is performing in these different use cases. How are you thinking about testing at scale, um, both with Coval, and then how is it different than, of course, like traditional software?
Yeah, I think the thing is AI inherently is stochastic, which means it can sometimes do things in ways that we don't expect it to, perform in ways that we don't expect it to perform in. We should treat AI like a human person, right? Like a human person that we're employing. Sometimes it's just going to say the wrong things over the phone. It's going to wake up on the wrong side of the bed, right? Our job is to make sure that we train it, fine tune it, that we test it, evaluate it, right, to the extent whereby we feel certain, we feel safe, we feel confident that it should be let out, and into the wild, essentially, right? And be allowed to engage with consumers, right? And that process requires a lot of tests because it's kind of like evaluating a person, like, a new hire over the course of the first 3 to 6 months, right? Making sure that they're fit for the task, making sure that they go through all of those, requisite training, making sure that, if they're making mistakes, that they're corrected, right? I think if we apply the same philosophy and the same perspective, you end up with AI that is safer, that is more trustworthy, that customers, members, constituents can come to appreciate, right?
Definitely. And that's, I think, where we see that's where I see a lot of parallels with Waymo, is that there's this false paradox that you either have something that's autonomous or something that's safe. But Waymo is a great example of self-driving cars are able to do both. They're highly autonomous, able to navigate situations that they've never seen before. If you have ever ridden in Waymo, you've seen it go around new traffic cones or encounter every single step it takes in the world. It's never seen before. It's a robotic life. It's never seen that configuration of humans before. It's never seen that configuration of cars on the road. And yet it's highly, highly autonomous. And we are able to prove with simulation the number of incidents that would happen per million miles, per 100 million miles, and then start to think about what levels of risk are we willing to take, given the alternatives where you have human drivers and tens of thousands of lives lost every year to human drivers. The risk is so high of the baseline. But of course, there's no opportunity for robots to make mistakes like humans do. And so what Waymo has done is been able to show like what levels of risk of different types of incidents, let's say like a hard brake or a like variety of incidents. And that's exactly what I think voice AI needs, is this thought less around this thing can never, ever, ever say this one thing. There are certainly some cases of that where it's like there are certain things that you can just never, ever, ever do. But there are other things that actually we want it to do almost never, but really you want to think about this as a risk tolerance, as what one out of a million calls, this can happen, or 1 out of 10 million calls, this can happen, or 1 out of 1,000 calls. Maybe like having an awkward pause or having a glitch in the audio is totally fine for consumers. And so starting to think about these things in probabilities is a super important transition. Have you seen, Ian, any other parallels like this in, like non-determinism, or is this a completely new space in terms of the assurance model?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think, look, assurance tends to follow kind of what standards that are pretty sort of prescribed, and there's standards that obviously people build infrastructure around to demonstrate that they meet quality management or safety management or sustainability or cybersecurity objective, right? So I think AI is very different, right? Because I think if you're building and you're hard coding AI agents to sort of color with between the lines, then obviously we're there. You're there through the technology, and we're there from the governance to make sure that people are coloring within the lines. The AI agents are doing it, but I think it gets beyond traditional assurance models to do so in a consistent manner when you're talking about variabilities like what you're talking about. And so that's where I think you have to blend good best practices in governance and limited assurance with technology solutions that help to test it out in the tens of thousands basis. And that's ultimately what Krew needs, which is why I think what we've tried to do together is super important. Now, it's still early days for this cooperation, but also more importantly, for what AI agents and what assurance is needed for AI agents. So as obviously things evolve, we're going to see obviously your technology evolve, Brooke, from Coval, but also Mike and his team of engineers are going to continue to test things based on the feedback they get from their customers. And so our job is providing that limited assurance that sits on top of it so that we can give an opinion that people can rely on. Obviously, we're going to come back and validate that we're still meeting those objectives, that non-discriminatory behavior or language or certain bias is not taking place in certain activities within AI agents. That's super important because God forbid AI agents go off the rails and they do something they shouldn't do. That
Yeah.
obviously what we're all trying to prevent here.
Definitely. I think this is a case where like this cooperation is very needed for regulated industries. You know, self-driving didn't develop the self-driving car, unleash it on roads, and then figure out the regulation later. It was actually something that happened in cooperation between cities and self-driving car companies. And I think that's the model that's going to work really well for voice AI, especially in regulated spaces, is kind of that continuous evolution and discussion around what do we expect our voice agents to do and what are they actually doing and how can we have that in constant dialogue so that we can have confidence in autonomous agents that will, you know, reduce hold times, will decrease bias, will increase reliability and availability of these systems to anyone so that there isn't an access block for all sorts of types of people. But obviously, we have to do that safely. Awesome. Well, I'm super excited about the future of where this is going. In my mind, and I would love to hear from you guys where you see the future in the next 6 months, 12 months, whatever time horizon. Something that I'm seeing is a model of SOC 2 evolving where you have the testing, you see like companies like Vanta or other agencies that help startups move really fast and be able to set up these compliance requirements. But at the same time, you need auditors and someone that can come in with that domain expertise and understand what are the models that we're like coming in and looking at these systems with. And startups, as well as enterprises, having a common language around what does safety look like, what do standards look like. So that's something I'm really excited about. I would love to hear your guys' take on where you see the industry going next.
Well, that's a great question. I think two things. I think first of all, in the near term, more and more customers are going to want, are going to demand, are going to expect, right? External audits, independent assurance, independent oversight, right, of the AI agents that they're deploying. I think that's clear. I think in the longer term, we could see potentially as AI agents start taking the roles of start doing more of these regulated tasks. Regulators expecting it to be part of regulatory exams, right? Like observing AI, plus you were observing people as humans graduate to more complicated and sophisticated tasks, right? Having observability over AI and putting it as part of the regulatory exams. And in the super long term, I don't think it's that unrealistic to expect potential licensing or certification, right, around AI agents, right? that are operating in regulated industries, right? A broker has to be licensed, right? Even folks in servicing are very much often certified, right? So it's entirely plausible to see the industry heading in that direction.
Amazing.
I concur, Mike. I would just say, look, more and more companies, as they deploy AI, as they add AI agents as part of their way to serve customers, are going to be expected either from their customers, from obviously regulators, and from society to demonstrate that those AI agents are meeting certain standards. The question is, what standards, right? And I think that's really what we're trying to define here in the work that we're collaborating on. Is we're defining the standards of the compliance standards that are coming from at least the industry, Mike, that you're operating in. But over time, in the next, I would say, couple of years, we're going to see obviously standards emerge that become generally accepted in the same way that SOC 2 has become generally accepted for cybersecurity and confidence over that. So I think that's going to emerge. Now, in the meantime, front runner companies that really want to demonstrate that they are doing more, are going to be trying to ensure that the agents they deploy in their operations are obviously meeting best practices, if you will. And I feel like that's really what's going to happen in the next 12 to 24 months before regulation sets in. And as you respond to more RFPs, Mike, and as some of your customers, Brooke, respond to RFPs, we're going to see more questions in RFPs that say, have you tested these AI agents? What reliable indicators can you point to? Has it actually been verified through a third-party independent auditor to give us confidence that the quality standards or the performance standards are meeting generally accepted AI standards that are emerging in the market? And I think that's what we're going to see more and more of over the course of the next 12 to 24 months.
Definitely. And I think that the best thing that platforms can do as you're building AI agents is to take part in these assurance models, or to really start to shape what those look like, because then you're always going to be at the cutting edge. And I think on the enterprise side, if you're looking to deploy agents and utilize some of these vendor services, or maybe you're building in-house yourself, really starting to think about what, as an enterprise, how are we thinking about this model of deploying voice agents? Because it will help to shape a lot of that discussion around, as you evaluate different vendors, how can you communicate what you're looking for from those vendors? So I'm super excited about both where this is today and where it's going. It's really cool to see Krew have the first assurance model for their voice agent and be thinking at the forefront of, how do we create the most compliant, reliable, and best performing agent out there, so that it's both truly autonomous and also really safe and reliable to put in front of customers. And it's been great to work with LRQA, Ian, on this project. So I'm super excited for what's next.
Great. Well, thank you, Brooke, and thank you, Mike. Let's talk in a year's time and see how things have evolved in the next 12 months, because I suspect we're going to learn a lot, but we're going to see more and more companies obviously wanting to take their AI agents and test them out and ensure that they actually meet these emerging standards that all of us are going to have to comply
Definitely.
with.
Well, at today's pace, this will be the standard in the year. Krew will be a multinational conglomerate. AI will be in the new space. So
And we will all be replaced with AI sort of agents in front of us. Is that what
yeah,
you're saying,
exactly.
Brooke?
Next time we don't even have to be here. So
Gonna show up in
we'll send our
avatars next
agents.
year.
Good.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, guys.